Hey, welcome back to Rethink Vertical for another episode as we wrap up this amazing year. I'm Kinsley Jordan, the State Director for the UAS Cluster Initiative, as you know, and I could not be more pumped to be able to look back over this year of what we have seen as an industry, as a UAS cluster, but also what the state has seen in the partners across the state. I mean, it's been a wild year. You don't need me to tell you that. We both know that. And to do that, here with me is one of my good friends, and you'd be very familiar with Mr. Craig Mahaney, CEO of DronePort Network over in Tulsa and Oklahoma City area. Craig, welcome. Glad to have you again, as always.
Excited to kind of think back through the last year and try to process everything that's happened. So it'll be fun.
Yeah. There's been a lot, and I guess I'll start off with my feeling going into the beginning of this year has been, there was a lot of investment made in the UAS industry and the drone industry. A lot of investment that really has been waiting on policy and programmatics to follow for approvals. Whether it's been from the FAA, whether it's been internal testing, flight testing capabilities, but there's a lot of kind of waiting, and investors are waiting to be able to get their benefit and their profits from the results of companies being able to really expand out and commercialize and grow. That, for me, that's been one of the things from the very get-go of the year. We have seen, I wouldn't say necessarily a slowdown of investment, but a change of what investment has looked like from being primary UAS companies to like peripheral technologies. Would you mind talking? Is that something that you've seen as well, or is that just my perception that what's been happening?
It's a true statement for sure. I actually just got off a call a little bit ago with a founder who is building one of those peripheral technologies. And I think it's even filtered down to those companies because, it's a very, very solid, mature founder team, a lot of technical capability, have worked at large technology firms and been successful, built really cool programs,
Yeah.
started a company, and just getting that initial seed investment for really interesting technology. I think the hesitation is, okay, the industry told us this story about sort of the regulatory pathway to scale commercial UAS,
Yeah.
what that timeline looked like. The timeline is not playing out as we were told. And so we understand that there's, things outside of the control of companies like Part 108 rule or, other regulatory challenges outside of Part 108. Infrastructure, right? Challenges.
Yeah.
I think that the patience is running thin a little bit, and so there's this need for investors to sort of say, "Hey, follow-on funding, let's hold off for now. Initial funding, definitely, we're pausing that unless there's just some sort of out-of-the-box concept that they can find customers outside of the UAS space and use that revenue to sort of sustain themselves for a little bit." There's definitely been a hit on the pause because also, folks are waiting for Part 108 to fully understand what that draft rule is going to initially look like and how that's going to impact sort of their business model. So, yeah, a lot of hesitancy. It's don't want to put the FAA on the spot. I'm going to. It's December 13th of 2024. And I think the industry was promised to rule initially in summer and then in fall and then end of the year. I used to work for the government. Starting Friday, December 13th, it is a ghost town. So I don't know who's
Yeah.
working on this draft. Maybe they're working on it from home. I don't know.
Yeah.
And maybe they'll push it out December
Yeah.
23rd and then go on vacation. I don't know.
Yeah.
TBD on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No kidding. And the impact the reason why I bring it up is I think it's so important to understand investment in dollars. When you talk about the growth of an industry, there's that initial push of one, believing in the industry. And I'm just talking internal of what we see in Oklahoma and kind of central United States. There's the belief in the industry, which then investment follows that belief. And then there's expected growth, kind of like it's not going to be the hockey stick, but there's an expected trajectory of what you're going to see as far as where the industry goes and the policies that follow, and then the commercialization and the purchasing of it. And if there's this cap, if you suddenly insert this block into a company's ability to be able to commercialize, everything that is surrounding that commercialization it's almost like there's distrust being built the longer that it takes. And it's not that it's investors' issues. Clearly, they're making smart investments because they have known how to be able to invest into companies. But you're absolutely right. When there's federal regulations that are limiting that, what are companies to do? And that's one of the things that we've seen on the investment side. It's kind of gone to the peripheral technologies, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's link autonomy development. Those investments have kind of expanded out, but even that you mentioned to the point, even that has slowed down a little bit because the question is like, okay, when is this going to get across the finish line? What does it look like? And then what are the limits going to be? So to companies who are listening to this, or those who are wanting to know, okay, well, that's great. Yeah, I feel the pain. I understand what that looks like. What does that look like for a company in this next year in their considerations of what they need to do? Is that diversification? Is it doubling down on just honing in on what they're doing? What does that look like as we have thoughts going into the next year?
Yeah. Um,
That's an impossible
I
question.
mean,
You like how I just
well,
threw that
it's
on you?
no. I mean, I think it. No, I think it's an answerable. I mean, it's going to be a little bit different depending on the company and what they are capable of doing. I
Yeah.
think there's. I'll answer this in a couple ways. One is I want to start by saying that like even though we don't have a draft Part 108 rule, um, it's not for a lack of trying. I think that I do have a pretty high level of optimism because I know that the reason these rules take so long is because they are writing them in a way that they don't miss things, right? They
Right.
want to put out the best possible product. And so ultimately that produces a level of frustration on the front end. However, once the rule is out, public comments happen.
Right.
Who knows how many public comments we're going to get. Um,
Yeah.
Once that rule is in place, it really takes the shackles off, right? So once a company knows what the requirement is, then they can scale based on that requirement. The challenge with, I hear a lot of like, well, we could go to other countries that have less regulation. Well, yes, that's true. And that's what's happened early on. But in my opinion, ultimately, companies will be successful and scale under a known regulatory environment if the regulatory environment exists, versus going to an area where the regulatory environment is influenced by so many different things. Like that's one of the challenges, right? In Europe is like you've got each little bit, each country making its own rules, and so there's so many unknowns that like they could innovate quickly really early on, but then they got to the point where the companies are really stalled because there's seven different competing regulations being proposed from different countries and different ANSPs.
Yeah.
And so I think what's going to happen is once the US finally gets this rulemaking process done, they're going to very quickly surpass everything that's going on in other countries, and it will, and then it'll be them playing catch up. So I think we're going to see that reverse. Everybody doesn't agree with me on that. That's fine. I think that's probably what's going to happen. So I'm optimistic. So back to your original question, I think that companies are trying to decide, do they have enough money in the bank to stay the course for another 12 to 18 months, 24 months,
Yeah.
right? To be on the safe side. It's not just about getting a draft rule. It's about that draft rule actually becoming a rule.
Yeah.
Proposed
Right.
rulemaking becomes an actual rulemaking. That could take another 2 years, maybe longer. I don't know. It depends on what happens after public comments. So, do they have enough money in the bank to stay the course and stay super laser focused on what they're building, or are they going to be forced to be distracted by other opportunities to survive for the next 24 to 36 months? And are those legitimate opportunities that they can really bring in sustainable revenue?
Yeah.
Or are they just distractions and their product suffers? So there's a weird balance going on between like what the investors say, hey, find new customers, find new options. Well, that might work if it's a legitimate source of revenue, but it may also just be a distraction and make your product worse. So
Right, right. That's interesting you say that. A lot of my experience has been seeing cyber companies that have utilized cyber to be able to kind of bridge those gaps in between. One of the things that I mentioned to him many, many times is do not put all of your eggs in the basket of waiting on the federal government or a federal
mm,
grant cyber to be able to bridge that gap because just as quickly as it's there, it can go away. And I think to your
mm,
point, there are uh, really strategic thoughts that need to be happening for a company of saying, if it's so close, do we hold out? What do we need to do? Because, like you're talking about, if you divide your attention, and it's divided, and now you need to sprint in rapid development.
Mm.
Like now you kind of hamstrung yourself.
Yeah.
And to your point, it's not that it's an impossible question, but it is definitely an intentional question that if these companies are going to have to say, okay, what do we have to continue doing, and how do we make sure that we have the longevity for that to be able to happen? You
Yeah.
also bring up a really good point in the sense of if there is this potential, and I know you said some people disagree with you. I agree with you. I think once the handcuffs are off, those who are ready to accelerate will accelerate, and those who have hamstrung themselves or handcuffed themselves for survivability sake, they may be left behind. But
Mhm.
looking to the future rapidly, do you see any because things have slowed down and stagnated waiting on this? Do you see limitations in the ability to rapidly accelerate? Like, what is going to be the next barrier that companies in the industry can be thinking about? That if they are wanting to rapidly accelerate once the approval is given, what's going to be the limitation at that point? Because there's always a limitation. It's just what
Oh
is
yeah.
the thing that's going to catch people off guard when they're really ready to accelerate once approval is given?
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a couple reality checks that happen pretty fast. One is going to be, was your
I
business
like how you say that.
your is your business use case real, right? Because you can say
Yeah,
whatever you want when
yeah,
there's no customers, right? It's
yeah.
like, well, this is going to be a great idea, and then there's no customers, and it's like now there's no regulation. You don't have an excuse anymore. Like you either scale or don't, and it's like, oh, there's still no customers. Okay,
Right,
well, the company it no longer exists because they're what they presupposed wasn't true, and it could be for they could be just they thought there would be and there's not, or it could be they were being misleading, whatever it is. I think the other thing is public acceptance. I think that's the next elephant in the room. I mean, the elephant's already in the room, but that people it can be ignored because we don't have the regulation yet, right? We can use that
right.
as an excuse, but very quickly, um, what you're seeing, down in Texas, I think it was it around Texas A&M? I believe it was Wing. I don't quote me on any of this, although it's now open to public, but I believe it was Wing that had an operation, and the community started pushing back about like some of the noise and visual noise around the campus, and
Yeah,
so that is a single instance that you will continue to see pop up in other places as things start to scale. So I think there probably should be a sense of urgency about really helping communities to understand what the impacts of this industry will be. And then not only that, I mean, that's going to happen no matter what. Like even if you prepare communities, there's going to be folks that didn't know or weren't, sort of didn't speak into the issue to begin
yeah,
with. But I think the ability for both the FAA, community leaders, and those companies to try to figure out how to answer those challenges, right? It's
right,
like
right.
you told us this. You told us having this new technology in our community was going to be the best thing ever, but now all we do is hear people complaining about it, about
Right.
how it's impacting their lives and it's flying over them all the time, and like I don't know if there's
Right.
a really good answer to that. It's just one of those like learning things that it's going to happen. Those things are going to end up in the news, right? You're seeing all the stuff going on in New Jersey right
Oh
now.
my
It's
gosh.
like,
You looked
yeah,
at the
and
script. That's I
uh,
was going to bring
I,
that up.
oh yeah, I don't know if we want to go down that rabbit hole. It's just a little snapshot
Yeah.
of what will become fairly normal. People believe they believe down deep that they are there's a certain level of privacy that they expect, and
Right.
they expect to kind of understand what's going on in the environment around them. And for
Right.
a while, they really won't, right? Because it's like, oh, there's all these drones flying around in New Jersey. Well, there probably is some. Are all of the sightings a rogue drone? Probably not. Some are probably helicopters. I mean, identifying identifying aircraft in the air at night for a trained professional is difficult. For
Yeah.
somebody that is not in aviation, like
Yeah.
it's hard to rely on like, hey, I saw a drone the size of a minivan.
Yeah.
Well, did you like, or was it just a helicopter that you thought was a
Right.
drone because you saw a small drone earlier in the day? I don't know. So that's just not to say that any of that's wrong or right. It's just saying that like that's going to be repeated over and over in multiple different places as the scale starts to happen. So yeah,
Right.
that's going to be one of the challenges.
Well, and to your point, I was just even a couple of minutes before this, we were doing this recording. I was talking to some friends at Tulsa Innovation Lab, and he brought up the point. His background was journalism, and he's saying the importance of communicating not once, but how many times it takes that communication to happen for before people or an industry will really start soaking in the truth of what's happening. And then you have your own experiences paired on top of that. It almost makes me feel like we are already behind on the communication aspect of it. If we're waiting for approval, that communities, or even from the state perspective, that there is a significant amount more of communication that needs to be happening about the possibility of what could be happening. And I can understand why people would be hesitant to want to communicate beforehand, because you don't want to shoot yourself in a you don't want to shoot an industry down, no pun intended, before
Mm,
before it actually takes off, and then have people saying, well, we don't want this or we don't want that. But then there also is this very real and sometimes visceral response of people saying, whoa, what's happening here?
yeah.
Regardless of the benefits to it, it's it's the truth of some of the things that you have to weigh through. And I kind of weigh the difference between this of, you have some of the surrounding states, because as the UAS cluster, it's a regional innovation cluster, so we have the responsibility of understanding what's happening in Texas and Arkansas and Missouri and Kansas and the surrounding areas.
Mm,
And you have places like Bentonville, Arkansas, where yes, they have different type of investment structure of company investments into those areas. You have Walmart, Tyson, but you see a community that has really rallied around the idea of, hey, this is what our future is going to look like. And it's interesting how they've done that and kind of rallied themselves around. Why is it so difficult? I say that's a difficult challenge to be able to do, to really get not only the talking points, but the aligned communication of a organization to be the same within a region. How do you
mm.
foresee that we do that effectively, knowing that it seems like a lot of that communication is being held back because there's not even the policy yet in place?
Yeah. Well, I'll say that like it's like that old adage, like don't try to recreate Silicon Valley. Don't try to recreate Bentonville, Arkansas. Right there's only
Right.
one Bentonville, Arkansas. There's only one Walmart. There's only one Tyson. I
Right.
mean, those are giant economic drivers of a community. They have a level of trust in that community that is only built because they reinvest back into their community because that's where they live and work. And so there will be other communities like that that have sort of that stalwart economic driver company that like is trusted, and if they champion an initiative, it's just really rapidly accepted. That is
Mm.
not normal in the United
Yeah.
States, and so I think that like I don't know who recreates that,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, you talked about Tulsa Innovation Labs and talking
Yeah.
about Oklahoma. I mean, the George Kaiser Family Foundation has played a similar role. Like that's where they live. That's the community that's important to them. They've reinvested back in their community, and so they've, because of that, because they care, the community cares what they think and like what initiatives they champion. So like,
Yeah.
and you see that in the aerospace industry. Like I got this question the other day. It's a kind of like, why well, we'll just throw this out there, and I may be totally making this up, but this is just conjecture, right? This is why is the advanced air mobility um, suddenly super interested in Dallas, right? Because it was LA, and then it was New York for obvious reason. That's where people are. That's where you sort of see this urban air mobility concept. Like, why all of a sudden Dallas? Well,
Right.
having worked in the FAA and worked with airlines for a long time, American Airlines has a lot of influence in Dallas, right? And
Right.
so American Airlines will be a major customer of advanced air mobility companies, right?
Yeah.
So they are a
Yeah.
major economic driver for the region. They have a level of influence that is obvious. They hire a lot of people. They pump a lot of money into the economy, and so they should have a level of influence. And so they get to they get to have a say, a little bit of a say, right? You could see something similar in Atlanta with Delta, like these potential customers for this industry. So I think that um, you know I don't know if I'm answering your question, but that's kind of how I
Yeah.
see. Can that be replicated everywhere? No, it will be replicated in some places. I
Yeah.
think the building the level of trust for the industry to scale in all the other places that don't have that um, will be based on, well, it's like social media, right? Like we can compare it to social media. the public has to want it more than they hate it, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you ask anybody, like, do you like social media? Like, as they're on Facebook, no, I really hate social media. But man, I don't know what I would do without TikTok. But man, I really hate this. But I'm going to keep using it every day, and I will even pay
Yeah.
for it. So
Yeah.
does drone delivery survive as a business concept? Um, it will if people need it more than they hate the inconvenience of it. And I don't
Yeah.
know the answer to that yet. I think there are companies making the case that making the business case that will work.
Hmm.
Like the number of customers they need, how much the weight they need to carry. They're doing all the math, right?
Yeah.
And they're saying we can make the unit economics work. What they don't know yet is will that overcome how much the public may not like having it fly over their head every day,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
TBD on that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really, that's incredibly interesting you mentioned that because there's, um, I look at the factors, like some of the factors of why people wouldn't necessarily like it. One of the main things, going back to the noise complaint of saying, "Hey, there's noise. We don't want it overhead." But if you look at just what iterations of, I know there will be a future where whether it's low impedance props or that decrease the noise level of what people are actually hearing to the point maybe they won't even recognize it. And that totally changes the calculus of whether or not they want the thing. Because if the reason why you didn't like it in the first place goes away and you don't notice it anymore, and it's not really an impact to you, and you don't feel like, you're constantly being surrounded or have something over your head, that totally changes the game completely. But it is really interesting because it requires you to get past that initial hurdle of it being a viable business and then making it more efficient and more effective. And there's a real possibility, I mean, it gets shot down in the sense of not actually the drone getting shot down, but in the
No
sense
pun
of,
intended, right? That's
no pun
another no
intended,
pun
man. We're
intended,
just
right?
full of them today. The dad jokes are strong today. But
Right, right.
there's a real possibility that people in areas are not ready for that, that they're not ready for it,
Mhm.
and then you'll see it
Yeah.
succeed in pockets, and it may be a reemergence where in a couple of years, it's tried in an area, people don't like it, it goes away, goes somewhere else for maturity, it is improved, and then it ends up coming back. The real question is how do you, I guess, from a state and regional perspective, what's required to be able to enable that growth and experimentation and advancement of an industry, even through the pain points, but also flex with um, those who don't like it and the natural barriers that exist. Man, it truly, it's been fun. Last parting shot question before we
Yeah. Yeah.
head out for the holidays and Merry Christmas is
Yeah.
what are, in everything that's happened in the last year, we've talked regionally, we've talked investment, development that's happened locally, challenges that are there, policy and programmatically. What are you most looking forward to as your Christmas wish of what you hope happens in the industry that Santa
Oh,
brings
okay.
on his slide to the industry? What do you most hope to see in this next year if you were Santa for a day, making your deliveries to the UAS
Mm.
industry?
Oh, so what do well, I don't know if mine is like broadly industry related. I mean, I think we'll see a draft roll. I think we'll start to get a sense of what that's going to look like. It will probably change. I think, uh, like from a like a local Oklahoma state perspective, just because we do so much work in this area, there is a ton of federal dollars being pumped into the ecosystem, and that's a significant portion of that is in Tulsa, and a lot of that is from different EDA grants.
Yeah.
The most recent being the Tech Hubs grant, which we're kind of participating in that program, and so I think what I'm looking forward to is we are at this sort of critical juncture of where mature UAS operators really kind of have the technology and like the operational side of how they see things going figured out. Like that's going to
Yeah.
change, but right now they've got a plan, they've made a plan, they've implemented it, and they're sticking with it. Now they're just kind of like patiently waiting.
Yeah.
What hasn't been figured out is what does the supporting regional infrastructure look like to help them scale, right? Are they going to have to take their total vertical technology stack with them everywhere they go? Are they going to take it some places? They'll take it some places where the ROI on the business case is high enough, but really that's not scalable. So one of the things that I'm excited about is like really taking some of those federal grant dollars and helping build out those types of technology, digital infrastructure ecosystems that are plug and play, so that you can
Yeah.
offer pay to play infrastructure to small startups where they don't have to go out and buy expensive pieces of hardware. And then also really kind of refining what is really required, right? Because there's plenty of companies selling things, selling pieces of hardware and software that they say you will need to operate. We're going to get real pretty quick about once these companies actually start scaling and operating on a wider in a wider area,
Yeah.
what is actually required, right? Who's selling me a technology stack that's like cool but not necessary, and like
Yeah.
those things will very quickly be weeded out, and those companies will pivot to do something else or they won't exist anymore.
Right.
But that's what I'm looking forward to, is like a refining down of what's actually required to scale the industry, and then figuring out how communities can support that and how they are able to afford
Yeah.
to support it.
And I think that that really gets to the point we were just talking about, that it allows those who can, once you get to that point of understanding what is going to be most useful for those companies to be able to accelerate their growth and really get where they need to go. We really see just growth in the industry as a whole. Once we know more what that looks like, and they're able to have their needs met and drive forward, because the cost, I mean, it's always the case with the early adopters, but the sheer cost of operating within this realm of uncertainty of where policy and not only just policy, but what is required to exist as a UAS company now is significant. I mean, it's significant. If you want to remain relevant, it takes a lot. I feel like, to be there. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. I am hoping, one, for approval that we see the draft soon. But two, my Christmas wish, I guess, for this just industry as a whole would be um, a intentional thought of everybody has, whether it's from a state perspective, whether it's from industry perspective, there's always this thought of, okay, how is your client going to consume what it is you're offering? How do people consume your product? And I think there's been a lot of work in the industry as a whole, but when we look at what success looks like for our region and partners that are within the industry in the region, is the customer local or is it from a national scale? And I think the answer to that is it's more from a national scale of how do we communicate what we offer as a region, as an industry within the state, within the different multiple cities and partners that we have. How do we make ourselves so relevant that people are saying, "Oh my gosh, we need what Oklahoma has. We need what the industry has grown in Tulsa Innovation Labs and Oklahoma City and Ardmore and all of these amazing places. We need more of that. We need to get there, and we need to partner with them." How do we do a better job communicating that? That's my hope. Is there's a real palatable ability to consume the awesomeness that is happening here in the state of Oklahoma as a whole, and its regional partners, of course. So, well, listen, thank you so much for your time. I know it's been wild getting ready to go into the new year as we get ready for break, but I truly appreciate your time, Craig, and as always, as a leader as you have been in the industry, thank you so much. Any parting shots for you, my friend?
Yeah, Merry Christmas to everyone, and I I feel like this has been the busiest time of the year when I want to be winding down and taking a break. It just seems to be moving faster and faster, and so I suspect a lot of folks watching this podcast are in the same boat. So I suspect I'll probably be shooting emails off on December 22nd, 23rd. Hopefully not past then, right? That's my goal,
Yeah.
anyways. But
Yeah.
yeah, good to chat with you. Good to kind of catch up and think back through the last year, and looking forward to what's to come.
You as well. You as well, truly. Well, thank you so much again for joining us here at Rethink Vertical. You have your chance to be able to follow along with us, not only online, listen anywhere where the podcast is screaming where the podcast is screaming, where the podcast is streaming. Yeah, pretty slip. Make sure you follow along, because upcoming in the new year, we're going to have a very special guest with us, futurist, talking about what they foresee, what's happening in the industry, and the indicators that you need to be staying relevant with, especially being in this space and getting ready for 2025. So my friends, right here from Rethink Vertical, thanks so much for joining joining us. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we'll see you back here in 2025. See you next year. See ya.